Alright, here we go.
Yeah.
Should we introduce ourselves?
Okay,
I'm Christine Nugent-Olds.
I'm Alicia Elms.
I'm Jacob Standard.
I'm Jaden Emerald.
Alright, and this is week number 2, discussion book 1.
Yeah, so I'll start with my Jigsaw A first. It's there's some specific questions there. So we started off with the chapter 5, early books for children, and they're kind of asking what the purpose of children's literature was when it first came out, and what were those books like. I basically answered that it was originally sort of like a religious authority was making the books, and they believed that children were like essentially wicked, and they wanted to purge the evil from them, and so they made all these religious books that sounded really boring, and that I'm sure kids had to read and were forced to read in order to like get the wickedness out of them. It's very like Puritan kind of thing. But it kind of reminded me of a deficit view of education. You know, like the cultural deficit view of education or something like that. It was like that old school view of children as like not possessing anything.
Yeah.
And not bringing anything in.
They're not worth anything.
They don't bring any tons of knowledge in.
Exactly.
Yeah.
They're here to indoctrinate.
That's what this reminded me a lot of.
Yeah.
And I thought that was pretty cool. I mean, it's really interesting just reading about the history. And like at the same time they had these horn books, they also had more fun books that were kind of illegal for like fairy tales and like funny stories and things like that. And I just find it really interesting that that existed back then, and that sort of stuff still kind of exists today if you think about it with movies and books and things like that.
I feel like that idea you're talking about that children don't bring anything is so opposite from how we view things today.
Yeah.
And really valuing students as individuals and not thinking of students as like a collective, but more of
Or as empty vessels to be filled up.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So it's more of what can you teach them and what can they teach you.
Yeah,
It's what can you learn from each other.
a reciprocal relationship for sure.
And I think that old skill at school, I was just having a conversation today with an older teacher, and that old school, they need to be sitting in rows, they need to be silent, they have to listen to me, I am the authority, I know everything, they know nothing, I am here to teach them and mold them into the adults they need to be, instead of they bring so much to the table.
It seems to still exist in some places.
It did earlier today.
Yep.
Yeah.
So yeah, there's another question. Like what trends started to emerge in the early mid 1900s, early to mid 1900s. So like that was when stuff like fairy tales and popular stories that were specifically made for children started to come out, like Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe, and The Hobbit, which I love. And just all these adaptations of popular fairy tales that were adapted for kids. So like that was the first time you started to see like easily decodable text, to use the t-shirt lingo. Yeah.
I feel like a lot of the books in the beginning were meant to terrify children.
Yeah. They're really scary.
Some of those original fairy tales, and they're horrible.
All the kids get eaten.
Exactly, the kids will die.
I feel like it kind of goes into what I was reading about. I was reading about New Realism, which was going to your kind of fairy tale type talk and stuff. There was a lot of that going on, and not a lot of what was actually happening, such as like divorce and death. And so that's kind of where New Realism comes in, and authors start writing more about segregation and real things that are going on in society. And so that just kind of made me think of that and how it just shifted from being really fantastical to being more realistic. And, wow, okay, this is really happening, and this is what's going on, and this depicts how things are today.
Yeah.
What are going on.
Yeah, because that ties to the last question here, that how do children's books today still have the same characteristic? And it's like, you see a lot of the magical realism today, like you were talking about. And it's always like, it could be an average neighborhood and the kid's family is getting divorced, but then like something magical happens. And like that makes it more identifiable with kids, I think, in some cases. Because the protagonist is a lot like them, and they have the same sort of problems the kids deal with, like they're poor, or their family's getting divorced, or they have to move to a new school, to a new town, stuff like that.
I really like that lens because it makes characters seem more, identifiable, but also there's still that imagination in there with
Yes.
the whole, fantasy and vampires, and so
Yeah.
it's still like not exactly attainable, but it
Mhm.
still keeps them like, I get this kind
Yeah.
kind of thing.
Those seem to be sort of like almost the new fairy tales in
Yeah.
a sense. And now there's a sharp divide between fairy tales and myths and stuff like that,
Yeah.
and this magical realism. I have another question. It said, this is for chapter 15 now, so we're moving on, and about multicultural children's literature. And it said, in your own words, how would you describe multicultural children's literature? And I know, I'm sure we all have different answers, but I said that it embraces different cultural viewpoints and doesn't really stereotype any culture or race or group of people. And even if the group is in the majority too. So I thought that was an important point that the article made as well. Like, nobody gets stereotyped, Yeah.
Part of what I was reading was kind of contradictory. Like, some, I guess, multicultural can,
Sure.
in some way. I mean, it was talking about the book Mud City, and I
Mhm.
read that book in 7th grade, and I loved it. And it was, the one scene they were talking about is this one Muslim girl is, during that time, the Taliban was, really high in power, and
Mhm.
so a lot of, I don't remember exactly the history, but there were a lot of Pakistanis, it's kind of Israel thing against, and they were put into refugee camps, kicked out,
Mhm.
and put into refugee camps. They were like, we don't have food, they don't have a place to go, and so this Western family takes her in and is like, we'll take care of you.
Yeah, I read about that. In
Yeah,
there,
and so there's to some extent where there's still stereotyping, like, back here, and it's still there though, and so it's just interesting how in some layer I guess you don't see it, and then if you look at it in a different layer,
Yeah.
it's there.
I guess this would be my definition for it if it was perfect.
It was a perfect world.
Yeah. But like you said, even in that book, the nice Western family takes them in and teaches them how to live.
Yeah.
And it's like, and then, or they rebel against them, or the Western family gets tired of their foreign traditions and stuff like that, and it's like, that still happens.
It still feels like the us against them. And
Yeah.
someone trying to fit someone else's ideal of perfect instead of letting people be how they are.
And you're stereotyping Western families too.
Exactly, because not all
Everybody,
Western families
everybody's
are.
getting it.
That kind of made me think about the whole utopian us not, or okay, not us, but like the whole we're not putting reality before the new realism. Like, was that us thinking, like, I guess, like thinking we're a utopia? We're just gonna keep all that bad stuff
Yeah.
out because it's not there.
Yeah.
Type thing.
Just pretending it doesn't exist or it never
Yeah,
happens.
Partiality is there.
And I also feel like a lot of educators don't feel, and parents don't feel that kids can handle the truth, and so they're like, we're going to protect them and make their world perfect because
Yeah.
they don't have the ability to handle the reality that is actually sitting in their backyard. We don't give them that benefit of the doubt.
Yeah.
And I think kids are a lot smarter than a lot of people.
And the reality is they're going to deal with that at home
Mm-hmm.
all the
Yeah,
time.
exactly. So we brought up the Giver and the Utopian. In my school, a parent actually tried to ban that 2 years ago because it was evil and it was disgusting and it was, romanticizing child infanticide and just like, really, and it talked about sex. And
Oh no.
God forbid we talk about sex. Or it didn't even talk about sex. It talked about relationships and feelings, and I'm like, your kids are going through this. They're in middle school.
They're always going to have
They're going to have that,
relationships with
but
friends
exactly.
and other people.
But there's this thought that these kids can't handle this, but if we don't teach them through literature or through other things
Then
how
they
to
won't.
deal with it and how to talk about it,
Yeah.
where are they
It's a
going to learn?
self-fulfilling prophecy.
Exactly, yeah. But if we don't talk about it, then it won't happen.
Yeah. That sounds like people back in like the 1600s when they first started writing these books.
Sorry.
Yeah. My last one was from the Reading Globally article, and they're asking about how you rate a book's authenticity. I just sort of took from the article in this answer, but you have to just really look at the author, and you have to check what's their experience in relation to what they're writing about. Like, do they actually know what it's like to be this person? Have they had any experience in this, or have they interviewed people that have done this sort of thing, or are they just sort of making this stuff up? Have they how well have they researched it? Like, what's their bibliography? A lot of these books about like contemporary places in realistic settings will have bibliography that you can really look at, or the author will have some sort of background in it, like they went and helped out there for a while. They're head of a council, in some war-torn country or something. They wrote about it because they had experience with it. And then, like, also, are there like characterizations for characters that are like too one-sided, or do certain characters of certain races all look the same? Do certain things get set up that are convenient to play into mainstream culture, like the whole going to the Western family to learn thing? That just plays into mainstream culture right there. It was just a setup for them to go there, and that was kind of my answer for that. How do you rate a book's authenticity?
It's hard. I mean,
It's hard,
depends
yeah.
on what the focus is. Like, if it's supposed to be, not real, or it's supposed to be realistic, and it's hard. But if you're outside of reading a book and you don't know anything about the culture, so you're like, I'm not sure if this is real. I don't know anything about this. Or if you are from the culture and you're like, I'm not sure what they're trying to get at.
Yeah. So, one of my questions later on was, am I qualified to even rate a book's authenticity?
That was
Like, if
my
I don't know anything about it?
It's not my place. And I mean, even when we say within a culture, my culture is different from your culture, this is different from your culture, this is different from your culture, because we come from 4 different backgrounds.
Yeah.
And so we can sit here and judge one another or think we know something about one another when our culture is completely separate and we have no idea because we've just met. But I can say, oh, this doesn't represent your culture because it's not my culture. But my culture is, I'm a Mennonite. Can't you tell? But people don't know that because they wouldn't be able to judge how I was raised or how I grew up. And so how could someone deem the authenticity of someone's culture based on, well, it's my culture, so it must be your culture because we kind of look the same.
Yeah.
I mean, culture even in the United States is very different and vastly different for 2 people living in the same town.
Yeah.
So how do I have the right to?
How do I have
the right or the authority? I'm not that arrogant to think I. So because I don't have that right.
Yeah, and even in the article, there's that story about the teacher that went to Haiti, and she wrote the 2 books, and she thought that they were both really good, and then it turned out that one of them wasn't.
Exactly.
So, and you just have to do the best that you can.
as a teacher?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Because you want to expose the students to
I like that checklist of like questions that.
Yeah, I
That's
like
a
that
good
one.
one.
Yeah, that one pager.
That seems to be the best you could do.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Just as a quick referral, like, does it have this? Does it not have this? That kind of thing. So.
And then we get into funding and curriculum.
Yeah.
All that stuff. Yeah, curriculum committees and that mess. So
Engage our students.
exactly. Their notes and how many parent phone calls am I going to get
Yeah,
on this?
exactly. No.
Yeah.
And that's it for my jigsaw. I'm done yours here. Whoever's B, are you B?
I'm B. So.
Hey, they're in order.
Perfect.
Yeah.
Pretty much.
Okay, so my first question was, how are books of the 1800s different from early books? And so it's really similar to what you were talking about, how at first they were about how to act properly. They appeared in books. And then it moved on to being more focused on the stories and incorporating real life.
Being fun.
Yeah.
No. I'm just joking.
Yeah, but it's kind of true. And then I was just talking about books that I read, like a Snow White book that I had, and it's cool that I actually read some of these books. I didn't even know they were from 1800s. But I've seen more movies than I have read books.
Yeah.
Like Cinderella. And then my second one was key characteristics about cultural text.
Okay.
And so, one of the things that stated was it should be more than people of color. It should be more cultural groups, like religious groups.
Sorry. Okay.
It's okay. And
Wait, what was that one, sorry?
I should focus on different cultural groups, like religious groups, yeah, other things like that. and there should be no stereotypes, and each character should have their own specific personality that doesn't play into a stereotype. And there's 3 different types. There's cultural neutral books, and those are the diverse characters but in an unrelated topic. So it could be something like going to the doctor and include a diverse set of characters. And then there's generic books which focus on one cultural group, but again, it's not focusing on that culture. And then there's cultural specific books which include details about the character's culture. And so then my next question was, why is accuracy important in evaluating international children's books? And
What's the last question?
it was, why is accuracy important when evaluating international children's literature? And so do we want to give children as much of an accurate view as we can about different cultural groups. And we don't want to lead them to stereotype cultures, because if we read them a book that stereotypes something, it's likely that they'll hold on to that, and that's what they'll think, especially if that's the only exposure that they've had.
Yeah.
And so,
I think that's very true.
Yeah.
Like, I'm not going to name names, but I was in a practicum class, and this boy just didn't think, what did he think? I don't think the whole class pretty much, not the whole class, but a lot of class thought diversity was a bad thing. They just heard that word and thought it was just a bad thing. Interesting. And so that was just
I wonder where that came from.
Yeah, I have no idea, but it was just,
Were these like kids or?
yeah, third graders.
Okay.
And so they just thought it was a bad thing, so they had to go through a whole unit of diversity and unity and community and what it means in the classroom, what it means outside, and I was just, wow, that would be a really hard one to tackle.
Yeah.
If the majority of your class just thinks of it as a bad thing.
Maybe somebody made it negative for them.
Yeah, I'm
At
wondering
some
if a
point.
teacher prior to that,
Yeah.
that can
or a
be.
student or a parent that was pretty vocal, used it in a derogatory manner, or
Yeah.
if they have parents who see diversity and complain about it at home.
Especially
So-
if it's like a
The
large
majority
of
class, it makes me wonder what's going on in their neighborhoods.
Yeah, it's got to be some sort of community thing.
Yeah.
Interesting.
I've never thought of age being a factor in, like, I guess, learning things, but I mean, I took psych before, and I was thinking how at third grade you're really in that mindset of me, you're still not aware of those around you, like their life, like you have your life, you do your thing every day, and you don't really think about what other people do in their daily life, and so really breaking that like, I guess that wall of, there are other people that have different things and that do different things than you do, and not everyone goes to gymnastic practice after and at the same time there's also that younger kids also don't have a concrete, like, concrete view on, I don't know, certain things that when you're an adult, if your parents are like, don't do this and this is how things are.
They don't have their rules.
They don't have their rules so set because they're still learning things too.
Yeah.
And I also wonder if it's just, I mean, you think about third graders or second, third, fourth graders, they haven't seen the world.
Yeah.
And for good reason. And if they're second graders or third graders, they're 8 years old, their world is whatever their parents have given them and whatever their peers have given them. So if they're raised in this small community where everyone goes to ballet and everyone goes to sports and everyone plays t-ball together, and that's their whole world, of course they're not going to know diversity. Or maybe they thought it was, I was trying to think, like, going through my head when you say diversity, is it controversy? Is it, what word does it sound like that turned it into a negative word for them?
It seems like, third grade is the beginning a little bit of intermediate elementary. Right?
Yeah.
Between third and fifth is intermediate. That's the time they have to start beginning to discover thinking abstractly about things, thinking outside their own bodies and their own lives. And it seems like explicitly teaching diversity would be hard before that, because their brains are not wired to understand something outside of themselves as much as they would be starting third, fourth, fifth grade.
I think
To
that
have critical discussions about it.
I think the littler kids, if they've been exposed to it, they understand it, they get it, but they don't have a word for it, and they don't have a phrase for it because it's just life.
Yeah.
It's just if they've been exposed to diversity, if they've been exposed to the world, then they don't have a word for it. They don't have a definition for it. They've never had to think about it because that's just life.
Yeah.
And so they didn't have to think about diversity. They didn't have to think about anything. It was just
once they start to really build
that's just how things are.
Strength and the wiring of their brain starts to come together for like really critical discussion about diversity. Like that seems like when things get really interesting in class for teaching that, because they start to like look at the world and be like, wow, there are problems with the world we need to fix.
Yeah, about fourth grade.
Yeah.
Seems to really hit. It's
They're
pretty
like,
cool.
everything's wrong with the world. We need to fix it.
Fix it all.
Yeah.
They're super cute.
Yeah.
Okay. And then I also thought it was interesting. I was wondering if examining books, we need to make sure we examine what's left out of the story as well as what's in the story. And I think that can be kind of difficult too. Because even the book we were reading, I was reading your response to it about how children never want to overtake inside. Yeah. And I didn't even think about that until I read it.
I had to keep watching it. I watched the video probably 6 times to figure out what side of the fence they went on, because I'm like, wait, did they ever go to the white side? Or is it just we're going to go visit and then come back to my world?
Yeah.
I can visit over there, but you're not welcome on my world. I'm just welcome in your world. It was really fascinating.
Explain that again.
And the other side, I just kept flipping through the video. I'm like, okay, this can't be right. But when the girl goes to play, she goes over to the black side of the fence, but they never come over to her side.
Oh.
They never once walk over, and she never invites them over.
Yeah.
So she's welcome to intrude, but they're not welcome to come into her world.
That's interesting. I've noticed that.
So it was one of the first things I noticed. And I'm like, wait, that can't be right. And I was thinking about this book and what this book is supposed to represent, and I'm like, is this
that at some point things are going to get better.
Yeah, but I'm like, is this an unspoken, you can't,
I feel like
you're not welcome,
Yeah.
you know?
I definitely got that. I kind of got that things are similar on both sides. Like we go to the store or whatever, we go in town, you know, I'm with my mom, you're with my mom, but there's still just a random fence that's dividing us. But we're like the same on both sides, even though there's this thing in the middle that is the same for both of us. Yeah.
Yeah.
It's like segregation kind of with the fence.
Exactly.
Yeah.
These are clear boundaries.
Yeah.
And you don't come to my side, and yeah, it was a really interesting. It was a really interesting look at that book. So, and I'd never read the book before, so it was my first response to it.
Yeah.
I feel like also like what I took away from that was like our parents have old ways of doing things, and we, I guess, as younger people have newer ways of doing things, and what, you know, our parents always say might not be the right thing, even if that's what they tell us.
Exactly.
And so it's like things are rapidly changing, and things are, you know, becoming different.
Yeah.
So I was just like, oh yeah, my mom said this, and my mom said this too, but there's no, like, they didn't say there was a reason.
There's no reason why. Yeah.
There's certain things that I've noticed, like, that as I grow older, there's things about my parents that become me, you know? Like, and then there's things that don't. Like, my dad was like a journalist. He was a very learned person, but like, he was really racist. And like, especially against Muslims and stuff like that. And it was like, some of the things he said, I couldn't believe it. Like, he was like, if I had a button, I'd just press it and kill all of them. I was like, dude, you're a journalist. Like, you're not supposed to be Yeah. And I was like, dang, like, I just can't believe that if you look at the gap between me and him, there's a gap for sure, you know. But then there's certain mannerisms that my dad has that I adopt too.
Yeah.
And it's like, sometimes I find myself becoming more and more like my dad in certain things. Like, it's kind of scary sometimes.
But the fact that you can point out that about your parents, I think speaks a lot. That you're like, you know what, you know, in your world, when you're a kid, your parents are these perfect beings that can do no wrong. And then as you grow, you start to question them and question how you were raised or how you...
My mom had the exact opposite political views and cultural views of my dad. I don't know how they ever got there. So I kind of balanced out in the middle there. Gosh.
I just left because I couldn't. I just couldn't deal with it anymore.
So it's really interesting. Or I find it really funny, like, how households, like, my mom and her brother are completely opposite sides of like the religious spectrum. Like she's a Democrat, but she just like doesn't believe in religion, just like nothing, like anti-war everything, and like her brother's opposite. And that's like my dad and his brother.
Yeah.
Like this is like the weirdest thing ever. I don't get it.
So my mom's a complete liberal, or the rest of her extended family, just the most conservative people you've ever met in your life. Where does that come from?
That's my whole family. They hide me. Like my dad, I'm thinking about my dad is highly racist, horribly racist.
Yeah.
And he'll be sitting there talking, and he's like, "Those damn Mexicans," excuse my language. I'm like, my husband is right here, and he's Latino.
Yeah.
He's like, I'm not talking about him though. And I'm like, what is right there?
Yeah.
Like, you have grandchildren. Do you not see this?
Yeah.
Like, you're talking about all of us.
Yeah.
And I know. And he's like, but I'm not talking about that. Your two son-in-laws are Vietnamese and Latino. Like,
Yeah.
you need to get over it.
that.
You can't talk like that anymore.
Yeah.
He's like, but I don't mean them. I mean the rest. And I'm like, okay, that's whatever. Yeah. Interesting.
Yeah.
Your grandchildren, you see them, right?
I guess just as long as I notice those things happening
Exactly.
and just sort of like critically analyze them,
Yeah.
that's the best. That's not a bad thing in a sense.
And that you're aware and you can really deconstruct what's going on. And,
Yeah.
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 Oh yeah, we've got two more.
Okay.
That one's at 9.
Honestly, we talked about most of them. But okay, I can briefly pull in some things. Do we know how long?
We probably have a good 15 minutes left, I'd say,
There's a
right?
You can just
26, 40.
Oh, we're good, yeah.
Okay.
We still got at least 20 minutes.
Alright. Where's mine? Okay. So basically, we talked about the new realism, and so that also kind of talked about minority books and the importance of minority books. And pretty much, it just said that new realism kind of paved the way for minority books in the sense that it was a time when, realism was coming in, so people were trying to write in unconventional ways and bring in, more relevant ideas, and so that kind of novel type of writing kind of was like, okay, let's, try writing about more relevant things,
Things that are actually happening.
and writing from different perspectives.
Yeah.
And so not only is writing from the norm, the norm perspective and seeing what, minorities are saying and, things like that, and from those perspectives and how they view the world. And so I think that was just a really big turning point. And, what else? The thing that I guess, it didn't really surprise me, but that it said that African Americans and minorities didn't start receiving the Newbery Award till 10 years after their white counterparts had already been winning it. And so that was really, that wasn't surprising, but it was like,
Was it like 1949 when the
It was
first
like-
one did?
no, it was like 1960.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, just
I think 49 was the first
just a
Book.
word.
Yeah.
Book award
book to be really written
written.
from an African American perspective.
Well, and you look at, like, the authors, up until really recently, like, authors either had to, like, change their name,
Mm-hmm.
they
Yeah.
had to, women still, I mean, you look at J.K. Rowling, one of the
Yeah.
best selling authors of all times, and she could not put a female name on her book because the manufacturers of the books, the producer, the publishers, thought this won't sell because it's a female author. So there's still that today,
Jeez.
that idea, and if you look even, around here, a lot of the authors either change them or abbreviate because they don't want that stereotype,
Mm.
and they're afraid that they won't be, like, the books won't be bought unless they are
recognized.
a white male.
Wow.
So, and you look at the, the list of winners, and what kind of diversity do we show on that list? We've got a couple trophy winners here and there, but really, what is the winner? Who are the winners?
Yeah.
They're, we all know the answer, but
Yeah.
yeah.
So we kind of had that.
No,
I did totally.
You're
Yeah.
fine. No, I was just trying to figure out what I was going to say next.
Talk about Newbery Awards.
Yeah, and so
Yeah.
I guess that having awards kind of built up that, like, incentive to write newer, different books that might win awards. So that kind of increased, and having an African American win that award also made other minority authors, give them the motivation incentive to start writing, because if they can do it, I can do it, and people should see and understand different perspectives. What else? Okay, said why multicultural literature was my next question, and what does it do for readers? And pretty much the article listed 3 different things, and the first one was awareness and understanding of other cultures, and I think that's really important because today we are still becoming so culturally diverse, and a lot of people just don't want to recognize other people's differences. They do this, oh, I must do this, or like the other way around. If I, go to the park, that person must always go to the park, or I go to church, this person goes to church, but it's, it's not like that. And so a quote that I thought was really, that kind of encompassed this whole idea was, literature is indispensable to the world. The world changes according to the way people see it. And if you alter, even by a millimeter, the way a person looks at reality, then that can pretty much change. And so it's really like thinking, I feel like that has so many different layers. It's like the world's changing, our views are changing, perspectives then change, and then how people view us change. So it's like, so many different things on different layers. And it is so difficult because the world is constantly changing. The new watch, the new this, different people are doing this, different people are marrying, and it's just, there's so much change, and there's so many things we need to recognize and understand.
I think in 100 years we'll all be a lot closer than we think. I mean, in terms of racial. There will be like a new race in this country that will just be everybody. And people are gonna have to learn how to deal with that sooner rather than later. Because that's just the way things are. That's the way people change, and the way times change. So.
And it's changing rapidly right now.
Rapidly.
I mean, with the I think advance of information and connectivity around the world, when we can get the information exactly.
Especially in America too.
Goodness.
Yeah, it's great. It's awesome.
Well, that video of 100
Yeah.
people, that was really cool.
Yeah,
Really
that was
perspective.
crazy. That was very interesting. I've seen that video before, but it was the updated version was pretty cool.
Yeah, I'm gonna show it next year after a lesson I do with my students. Have you guys? It was on Pinterest and Facebook, but they write down a goal and sprinkle it up on a piece of paper, and strategically you change the seating chart that day. And so I had kids come in, I strategically changed the seating chart and put one of the shortest kids in the very back of the room, and put my best athlete back corner, and then they write down a goal and they sprinkle it up, and then I took the bin, like the recycling bin, and put it in the front of the center of the room. I said, okay, there's your goal, reach it. You have to throw it and hit it. And we talked about proximity and where you're born and where you're placed, and you have no choice of where you're placed in the world. Some kids can't even see their goals, so how are they going to reach them if they can't even see where they're aiming? Some kids, they have all the talent in the world, but they're just too far from it. They don't have accessibility to reach their goals. And so it was a great conversation about privilege that we had, and I think that video ties in really well. I'm going to use it next year.
That's pretty cool.
Did a lot for them, I think.
Yeah.
Especially in a privileged, I teach in a pretty privileged community, and just getting them aware of the fact that not everyone has it this easy. Not everyone has the white picket fence and, the people coming around to measure your lawn to make sure everything's perfect. So, it was fascinating.
It's like they did that experiment where they had all the people with blue eyes and all the people with brown eyes. The people with brown eyes get certain privileges, and they just get treated better. Just everyone's nice to them, and people with blue eyes, they're screaming at them, yelling at them. And it's like a psychological experiment over the course of a couple days. You've seen that video. It's not really appropriate for, I think, younger kids. There's a lot of swearing in it, because people get fed up. They get really ticked off, they leave.
Not sure why,
and it's like, that's all about privilege, and about what it's like to be discriminated against.
Interesting.
Because some of those people, they don't have a clue.
never experienced it.
So they artificially create that environment, and it's like they can't handle it. They, like most of them leave because they can leave anytime they want. Pretty cool.
That just makes you.
You can look it up on YouTube.
That just makes you think about how people don't understand how other people live. Just
Yeah.
like right there.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Empathy.
That's
I feel like
Yeah, it was like some experiment they did in Britain, I think. Yeah, you should look it up. I think they did it for BBC.
isn't it weird? Okay, so there's like certain, I guess. Okay, so there was this thing I read in My Privilege in 410. It was all these. There's these different statements that were like, oh, I go to, I watch a TV show with the person is my race or whatever, or I go to the grocery store and there's mostly these people, people of my race here, or things like that. And then when it was, I guess, okay, for me, like, none of those things are true. And then when it did, I went to DC, and DC is very black, I will say. And so it was really strange to me because I've always been in communities that are really white. So it just felt weird. I don't know why. Like,
That was like the first time I went to the East Coast. I went to Baltimore, and I was like 15 years old, and I had not been around people that were not white, honestly. And I was like, oh my gosh, it's like 95% of people here, and it blew my mind,
it's
honestly.
just different.
Yeah, it was different. It was very different.
my first experience was going to New York after 8th grade, and I grew up in a small community, Mennonite, no TV, no anything. And I mean, it was, and my parents kept telling them I'm moving to New York as soon as I'm 18. And they said, okay, we're sending you there. And that was their response to me. And I got there, and I just walked around, and I was just staring at people. They were just looking for me. You know, it's like, no, not everyone has hair, you know, braided and up, and not everyone wears dresses, and not everyone, you know, we didn't fit the mold that, you know, and I went with a travel group, so it was safe, but it just blew my mind that there was media everywhere. There was, like, telephones on the street. There were these things that I had never seen before in my life. It changed my life. I mean, it changed my entire world, but, you know, people of color. I had not seen that because I grew up in a small town in the middle of nowhere. There was no access to anything. So it was really fascinating. It definitely broadened my perspective quite a bit, but you're right. It was like that, oh my gosh, there's people. There's different people.
Yeah, it's like I watched Game of Thrones. It's just a bunch of white guys with beards. Basically.
I went to Taiwan over spring break, and it was so different. I've stayed like Washington, Oregon, California.
Oh, yeah.
And so, crazy how different it was.
I went to Mexico, pre-service teacher. I went to Mexico and spent a summer down there in a full inclusion program just to see what it would be like to be immersed in a culture that I knew nothing about. I didn't speak the language. I got off the plane, and they put me with a family that spoke no English.
That's great. That's fantastic.
Fascinating. I think as a teacher, I learned so much empathy over those few weeks. Over what these kids feel like getting thrown into this culture, and I'm like, okay, I'm an adult, I'm a mother myself, I'm a white, I can handle a lot, and I could barely handle that. And I'm thinking, we've got these little kids that are being thrown into these communities and thrown into these cultures that don't speak their language, that no one looks like this, that no one acts like them, the social norms are different, and they're trying to navigate all this, and I could barely do it as an adult. And it was such a good learning experience.
Yeah, it was intimidating going to Allen Elementary for the first time because, to be honest, the class is like 90% Hispanic, and I am it's another culture, man. And I felt lonely a little bit because I was just like, man, and I felt like it was hard to connect. Like I was trying to connect. I wanted to connect so badly, but I didn't know how to do it. But like towards the end, I started to, and then like I went back to Allen again for a second time. And I really liked that time, and it was fascinating being the one on, being the minority, honestly, in that class, because it's like it's you, that's it, pretty much. You're the only white male in that entire class.
So how did the teacher then, so to bring this back around, how did the teacher then meet the cultural diverse needs of the students? or did they adjust curriculum? Or did
Yeah,
just
they had a
stick
lot
with
of things in
the-
their first language.
Uh-huh.
They had a lot of stories and math problems that took place from their perspectives that incorporated like these kids are all farm kids mostly, and they had like a lot of agricultural references, things like that, like how many chickens can I have if they, and these kids all know what chickens are. I mean, they are experts at that stuff,
Yeah.
about growing things and farm animals and managing them. So, yeah, it was really interesting. They did a really good job there.
I think that's really good. 'Cause a lot of, I guess, no, I'm not gonna say a lot, but some teachers definitely are like, there's so much diversity. What can I do? And it's, just gotta tackle one thing at a time and figure
Yeah.
out what works.
They
Is
just
it
tried
just
to,
adding Raoul to the math problem?
yeah.
Raoul had 8 apples,
Yeah.
and Jatika had 7. That's
Yeah.
not diversity.
Definitely not.
But
Yeah,
I
they
think
have
some
a lot
teachers
of-
think that is.
They have a lot of the first language just on the
Mhm.
walls and
Nice.
for labeling things and stuff
Mhm.
like that. I think it helps make the kids feel a little more at ease
Mhm.
because they understand what things are because there are labels on them in their first language, which is
Mhm.
always nice,
Mhm.
especially if you've never seen those things before.
Mhm.
So,
That's great.
I had a huge conversation this year with one of my students. I have an ELL cluster group in my class, or last year I did, and I will again this year. And the majority of them were Hispanic, and then I had a couple Indian kids, but a couple of Hispanic students decided to work together in a group, and one person wanted to join their group, and this kid did. And he was so angry that they were brainstorming in Spanish the majority of the time.
yeah.
And he was like, "Speak American!"
Oh my God.
And oh my goodness, that was one of those, I have to be calm as a teacher.
Oh,
I
yeah.
cannot lose it on this child right now.
Yeah.
And having a very large discussion about, this is the majority of this group, this is the language they speak. How do you think they feel every single day, every single class period in the
Yeah.
school? And where is it for you to tell them what language to speak? What makes you the authority figure? It was, I think, a really good learning opportunity for this young man
Yeah.
to realize that you've got a kid in there that speaks mixed tech, that then translates into Spanish, then translates into English. And so
Yeah.
this kid only has to go 2 languages instead of 3 in this conversation. So let's let him learn.
Yeah, I had some mixed tech kids as well, and it's like they are not necessarily Hispanic.
No, they're
Yeah,
mixed tech.
it's different.
Yeah.
And like their parents, like it doesn't have a written language.
Nope.
So it's like I can send them a letter and they don't understand it.
And most of them didn't, that culture doesn't value education. So their parents went to 1st to 3rd grade,
Yeah.
if they could afford it.
Yeah.
And then they went to work.
Seems
And
like
so
they value the hard work.
they value
discipline.
work. And the
Yeah.
kids are amazing. They're
Yeah, they
super
do
good
like
kids.
100 different jobs.
Exactly. Yeah. But
Their parents are out working.
mhm. So no, everything is oral communication with those families.
Mhm.
It's really fascinating. So learn the hard way.
Yeah.
Learn from my experiences. So yeah. Did you, sorry, we
No,
did that
no,
again.
no,
Yeah.
no, no, no. I was gonna be like, now
Oh my
it's
God.
your turn.
Okay, we talked about genres emerging. So what genres emerge in the culture? A lot about, so there's a lot more kids books, obviously. A lot of it, I think, depends on marketing now, and that's kind of the sad part of.
It's a business.
It's
now.
a business now. Instead of it's for the value of beautiful literature, it's what can we market and what sells. And it's, they talked about the toys being attached to the books for kids and the movie with the book attached. And so I feel like a lot of it has to do with marketing and then like the celebrities writing books. And it's not about the quality of literature. It's about, oh, Will Smith wrote a book or Madonna wrote a book or I just heard on the news this morning, Kim Kardashian speaking about a selfie book. And I'm like, seriously, this is what we're talking about on the news? I feel sorry for the world.
Jeez.
So, and it used to be, bookstores were these quiet intellectual places where people go to look intellectual, and now they're loud and there's kids sections that are marketed to kids with displays and colors and tables and events for children, and books. Libraries are the same way. They used to be this quiet, silent, like our Harry Potter room here where no one talks.
Yeah.
And now they're more these collaborative spaces, and I think that's just changing culture and changing trends. That bookstores and libraries are these meeting places where people come together and share ideas, which I think is really fantastic.
That's pretty cool.
Yeah, so I definitely see that shift. So it asked me specifically, like, how does marketing affect the way I choose books? It definitely affects me because I read what my kids read. I read what my students read, and so whatever they're reading, whatever they're being marketed, I'm reading because I want to keep up with them and I want to keep up and have those conversations with them. So unfortunately, their marketing affects my reading, and then I also read whatever I want to. I like to read that. So,
yeah, that's very true.
But they walk in, it's at their eye level. They're going to catch what's at their eye level, and they're going to read that book, or they're going to go to the top 15, or they're going to go to whatever it is that's on display, and that's going to be the great new book, and that's what they're going to grab. Or what other kids are reading. So I'm guilty of it. I set up this, and I'm like, oh, the Killard or Dashner,
The Warriors series.
Exactly, yeah.
Kids love the Warriors series.
Oh
man.
my goodness, they do.
About the
It's
cats
crazy.
that fight each other.
Oh, I know. Middle schoolers too. So, and it talked about the criteria for evaluating international books. I think we already kind of hit on that. Just talking about the details and descriptions of the cultural accurate. Are customs properly represented? And that goes back to the question we had in the beginning. How do I know? I've never been there. I can read about it, but how do I know that that book is actually properly representing the culture?
Yeah.
So it's really hard to evaluate that when I don't have the knowledge. And let's see what else. 10 quick ways to evaluate children's literature. I think we've already touched on. I also talked a little bit, because I'm coming at it from a different perspective, I think, how do I get, like, my team of teachers, my curriculum team, my parents, to actually buy in and buy literature that's culturally diverse? Because even I'm an ELA fellow for the state of Washington, and so I do teacher trainings around the state, and which is awesome. But I was driving home from the ESC with one of the teachers, and he was talking about the value of Catcher in the Rye and Romeo and Juliet, and he was going through the canon, and I just stopped and I'm like, you know what? You've not listed a single book that has a female character. And he goes, well, everyone can identify with the Holdens of the world. And I'm like, really? Says the white guy sitting next to me. Have you listed any diverse literature? And sure enough, no. And I fought this battle. I actually pulled my daughter out of a high school English course. So I'm a graduate, by the way. Surprise. But I pulled my daughter out of a high school English course because they were reading Dead White Guys.
Yeah.
And I said, there's no way I'm sticking her through a year of English reading Dead White Guys. And the teacher and the vice principal sat there and they're like, this has value, the canon has value. I'm like, I get it. Touch it and move on.
Yeah, it has
There
value.
is
It's
more
just
to
mixed with
world.
other things.
Exactly. That is not the end all
Yeah.
to our education system, and we need to add a more diverse offering to our courses. And I think, to this day, we still are battling this. Well, they have to read the canon, and they have to read, especially in secondary, they have to read the canon, they have to understand these references. Great, how can we teach the canon, but also show diversity?
Yeah.
And I think that's something that I'm stuck with, and I'm stuck fighting this battle constantly. How do we get people on board? How do we get our administrators on board? How do we get our parents on board? How do we get teachers on board to really to fight that? So it's interesting. Talked about global books. We talked about the mirror and the two sides of the fence. I think that's about it. So, a lot of me talking about the arrogance in the end of, yeah.
Oh, I think that was good.
Yeah.
Thank you, Joy. We'll see you next week.
Hi, Joy. Is that recording?